enjoy those, yeah.
Opening doors to
It
all kinds of
opened a lot of
places.
doors, yeah. Yeah, I'm a massive sports fan, so I could pretty much
Yeah.
go and see any sporting event that I wanted
Yes.
to.
David, let's talk about the price you pay for doing a top job. You may earn a handsome salary, but home and family life, in my experience, can suffer greatly. You may have the status and the power, but something's got to give, hasn't it?
It has, yes, and I think it's safe to say that I immediately after I joined BMI in 2000, I moved back from America, as you alluded to at the top of the show, and we had my wife and I had a little boy Charlie who was 5 months old when we moved back to the UK, and 5 months after that we tragically lost him to meningitis on New Year's Day 2001. And that had a major impact on myself and my wife in terms of the way we handled that loss and the way we handled our lives. It's an amazing disease in that it can just take you so quickly, and I still read reports in the newspaper of a matter of hours, and that's true with Charlie. We lost him within 6 hours of showing any signs of illness at all, and he was taken from us. And I threw myself into my work, and over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, I did nothing other than work, and that was my grieving process. I buried myself in my work. We have since had a couple of other children, but I didn't spend a great deal of time with them as they were growing up for various reasons. But I found it very difficult when they were going through the age that Charlie was, i.e. 10 months. And so I think, my family life did suffer tremendously, especially when I was managing director. And I think almost certainly, John, if I'd stayed in a job of that nature, my marriage wouldn't have survived. It has done, I'm pleased to say, and I have a very happy work-life balance now, and I spend a lot of time with my children. And I think with that as well goes a certain status. If you drop your kids off at work and are able to pick them up after school, some people after being in a top job would think that as a bad thing. I think that's a wonderful thing. It's I'm really proud that I can do that.
Well, for most of us, it's impossible to imagine the pain, the sadness of losing a child. You coped by throwing yourself into work. How did your wife cope?
Well, I think she showed a more typical grieving process, emotional. Ironically, within a month of losing Charlie, we started working very closely with the Meningitis Trust, and we raised over £100,000 over the next 2 years, doing various things. I ran the London Marathon that year in 2001, which was fantastic for me because I could just go out after work and just run and run and run. And take all my frustration out there, and culminated in doing a London Marathon, which was in Charlie's name. Emma was a more standard emotional grieving process, and we were taught very early on that people grieve in different ways, and you've got to respect that your partner and your relatives will be grieving maybe in a different way to you, but they are still grieving. So, and the other thing that we were told was to talk. It's very important to talk, and so we tried to do that, even if it was painful, to talk about what we were feeling and what we were doing. And somebody called me actually from America after we lost Charlie, and they just said one thing. They said, David, 80% of people that have a grievance in the family end up in divorce. And I thought it was an amazing statistic, and I wanted to make sure I was in the 20%.
Of course, eventually, I think that you and your wife had to seek some help in getting through this whole process.
Yeah, you do have to seek help, and I think that's another major issue for people that think they're very strong and very big and very powerful and what have you. To be able to face up to the fact that you are human, and things affect you emotionally and physically, and you have to get help in various forms. And I still need it. There are times when I still need it. I still need to, there are things that managing a grievance is very interesting. You can actually do it. I knew I was going to talk to you about it today, for example, John. Therefore, I know what I'm going to say, and I know how I'm going to say it. It was early on when somebody would come up to you and say something that you weren't prepared for. It may be somebody in the supermarket says, "Oh, how's Charlie?" and they didn't know you'd lost him. Those are the times when you find it very difficult because you can't prepare. They decrease as time goes on. But it's still there. Every day it's still there.
But eventually you came to the conclusion, though, that family life became so important to you that you couldn't be a family man, a husband and father, and do a top job as well.
I think you can. Whether I could or not, I don't know. I certainly thought I got to the position in my family life that I needed to spend some time repairing the damage. I didn't get the work-life balance right, and therefore I needed to go back and redress that. And I think now if I wanted to go back into a top job, I would be more aware of that, and I would make sure the work-life balance is correct. But at the time, I didn't. It was in the wrong direction, way over the wrong direction. So I had to spend some time redressing that. And ironically, while I was redressing that, I realised that I actually quite liked, being my own boss, if you like, being accountable to myself, and therefore it was very unlikely. Even though when I left Being My Baby, I was almost adamant I was going to go back into another job at some stage after taking the summer off. Now I wouldn't do it for a number of reasons, not least of which, John, the pressures at the moment on the aviation industry are incredible.
So it really wasn't difficult to come to terms with the fact that you would give up your job?
No, not really. Not really. I think it was difficult to work out what I was going to do next. There were various jobs out there in aviation. We looked at there were various low-cost carriers that were starting up outside of Europe and in Europe. I remember there was a job I was contacted about, which was setting up a low-cost carrier in Russia, which when you read the small print, it said you'd have to come to terms with local politics, which I interpreted as not being one of my strengths. Yeah, so no, so I could have gone back into it quite easily, but you don't. It was one of those things, one of those times in my career where I thought, right, I'm still young enough to do pretty much what I want. And it was then that I started, ironically, doing a bit of after-dinner speaking, about the airline industry. And going back to my media days, as you mentioned, in America, I've got quite a reasonable sense of humour, and I chucked in a few one-liners and a few jokes, and they went down well. And ironically, at one of these events, somebody came up to me and said, I run a speaking agency. Did you realise you could get paid to do that? And so I laughed them off and said no, and give me a call, and they did, and that was the start of it. And I'm now represented by about 5 or 6 agencies around Europe who get me speaking events, and I've got a routine about the airline industry.
Giving up the big job and doing this new career, which is a total transition from the kind of thing that you did. The difficulty for many people giving up a top job is that you lose your status, you lose the power, and when somebody asks you, of course, especially in the weeks afterwards, what do? It's quite hard to answer them, isn't it?
Well, the first few weeks after weren't, because you said, I'm the former managing director of Being My Baby. I left recently, and and people sort of understand that and say, well, where are you going next? And you've got various options and things in the pipeline. I think now, we're talking 4 years on. I don't. When people say, what do you do? It's an unusual one. I have got 2 smaller companies that I run myself, but my main source of income now is doing the afternoon speaking. And so I do say I'm on the afternoon speaking circuit, and they go, all right, and they look at you and they don't recognise your face, they don't recognise your name, and in the conversation they realise you're not very funny, so they pretty much say to you, right, okay, well, what's that all about? So, well, actually, I used to run an airline, and now I tell jokes and stories about the airline industry, and they go, okay, right. So immediately it goes back to it. So it's still there with you, and I don't think, as long as I'm on the speaking circuit, I'll ever be able to get away from it. But that is my hook, if you like. And ironically, on the speaking circuit, there are people from most professions in life that have found a way on to make a laugh and a joke about it. So the way I get most of my work, ironically, is clients will call up the agent and say, "Oh, I want Jeremy Clarkson to speak for me. I've got X, a couple of £1,000." They say, "Oh, you can have Jeremy Clarkson, but you'll have to chuck a naught on the end of that." And
you're a lot cheaper than Clarkson.
That's right. Yeah. That's an example. I don't quite know how much Jeremy Clarkson is, but we pretty much hang on the coattails of these celebrities that charge extortionate sums of money, but we are able to hang on their coattails. And so the agency will say, well, you can have these people on that budget. And there's a barrister, a solicitor, a gynecologist, scrap metal dealer, a banker. There's various people on the circuit that have come out of their industry with funny stories, and you adapt jokes and stories that you hear from other people as well. We get to travel. I've done events in Dubai. I did one in Kuwait, believe it or not, John. Dubai was great, very Western culture, but Kuwait was another story altogether. And I got into the room to do this after dinner, and they'd already told me no rude jokes, no swearing or anything, not that I do. but it's a very strict Muslim country. And I got into the room, and they all had headsets on, and all the jokes were being interpreted via these interpreters. And I thought, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. Anyway, they all laughed at the right places, and the guy that was escorting me around for the 2 days I was there in Kuwait, I said to him after, I was really pleased. They laughed in all the right places. And he said, don't get too excited about that, David. I think the interpreters were just saying laugh now rather than actually interpreting the joke. So I was a bit disillusioned by that, but it was a great experience nonetheless.
What you do now, though, must be, well, it has its own stresses. You're performing in front of a live audience, so there must be a lot of stresses in what you do today.
There is, and before every event that I do, I think to myself, what on earth are you doing this for? Why don't you just go and get a normal job? And that's good. You need nerves. Any entertainer will tell you need nerves. But it's to think that I can make a living out of telling jokes about the airline industry. I find myself very privileged, and there's nothing. My wife often says to me, because I like to get back home in the evenings, and she'll often call me and say, "You're all right to drive," and I'm on such a rush, I'm on such a high because you've got a great buzz out of the audience that the drive home's easy. It's never a chore. It's never a chore. It's always a pleasure, and I feel really honoured that you can do that. And at the same time, that buzz of being the MD of the airline, that status you do get when you're an after-dinner speaker, because you're the guest of honour. You're there to deliver and to perform, and so that buzz, that pressure, is actually something that I thrive on. Be it, and if you look at all of my career, it's been there. That real buzz of right, I've got to make a decision, I've got to deliver, I've got to act. And that's what I like, and you do get that being on the after-dinner speaking circuit as well.
So what about the future? Presumably you're going to continue then, just telling jokes and.
Well, yeah, I really enjoy it. You've got to. I believe. I'm 44 now. I believe you've got to do things that you enjoy, and I still get a massive buzz out of doing it. And I feel really privileged to be able to do that. The irony of it is, it's out of my hands again. If we have an incident in the UK, then my material will not be suitable. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So I've got to accept that, and ultimately, it's this could go wrong at any time. So, while I'm confident it won't, and I hope it won't, I've got to be aware of that. I've got two other small businesses, say, in the food and drink industry, which is an area I'm really interested in. So hopefully we're going to explore that and grow those under, which I own those companies, and I can work on those. But it certainly will not get to the size or the scale that I was before, and I'll certainly won't, or can't see myself going back into aviation.
But you might go back into another hot seat. Sounds to me like that you're leaving your options open a bit.
I am leaving them open. I don't know if I would do, because I love now being in control of my own destiny and being able to do bits and bobs. I've done a lot more now, even though I've lived in Burton-on-Trent for 10 years since I moved back from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. I didn't spend much time in the local community, and I've been able to do that now. And that has really, got me in touch with the local community, and they're really important. I think, in places like Burton and other towns and cities, people are really, regrouping and seeing what's immediately around them in this global marketplace. I'm now involved with Burton Albion as well, a local football club. So it's all great to be working in a local community, and something that you couldn't do in an airline because it was a pan-European operation.
And how would you describe your work-life balance today?
Well, I guess the best person to ask would be my wife and my daughters. I hope I've got it right. I certainly feel very comfortable. I came from a broken home myself. My father left my mother when I was 5, and so my brother and I were brought up by my mother. And that, I think, affected both my brother and myself, and we were both determined that wouldn't happen. It's easy saying that at the onset of a marriage and parenthood. It's difficult down the road to adhere to that. And so, as I said to you, I don't think I would be married still if I hadn't have left me and my baby. And more to the point, my wife thinks I wouldn't be either. So, but now I think we've got it right, and the focus is back. And I'm pleased because my children are at the age